All right, look, I have some stuff to share with you about finding a job in today's day and age as a programmer, and you're probably not going to like it. First of all, is the job market cooked? Kinda, yes. When you look at finding jobs as a software engineer, you kind of have to split it up into two different sections. First section is like enterprise and big companies, and the second section is startups and smaller companies that are looking for engineers. And shit is kind of cooked on both sides. Now, I've been a software engineer for quite some time. I've started and sold a startup. My new startup has the goal of getting as many software engineers hired as possible. And in the past 2 weeks, I've started doing that with my own followers on Instagram, where I would work with companies and try to figure out what they're looking for in a software engineer, and then find the engineers from my community that match that and try to get them hired. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm filming outside, I got a new camera and I wanted to test it out, so I figured I'd do this video with the camera, but it's kind of extra for a video like this. But anyways, like we talked about, the two types of companies are going to be enterprise and smaller companies like startups. And here's the issue with each. First, you have the bigger companies, and they are still interviewing software engineers like they are Google in 2001. They're asking all these data structures and algorithms problems, and the issue with that is a lot of candidates nowadays are just cheating on interviews. Like straight up, there was some survey done where 50% of interviewers, I think, thought that a software engineer was cheating on their job. And of most of the companies I've talked to in the last 2 weeks, most of them have said they have suspected at least one single candidate cheating on the interview. So yeah, if you're doing regular software engineering interviews, chances are a tool like Cluely or Interview Coder or whatever all of them are called are being used to cheat on the interview process. On one hand, it kind of makes sense. Like the tools that they're using to cheat are similar to the ones you'd actually use on the job. And like if you actually did need to know any crazy data structures and algorithms problems on the actual job, AI is good enough to practically teach you what you need to know better than a university course could. But on the other hand, it sort of detracts away from the engineers who took the time to actually learn these concepts and who are actually good at them and are trying to do the interviews honestly. So it's kind of a problem on both sides of the coin. Companies are asking the wrong questions, and because of it, candidates are answering in the wrong ways. And it's sort of built up this really weird situation where candidates feel like they cannot find a job no matter how many they apply to. By the same token, the companies that are coming to me and trying to get me to find them an engineer have talked about how hard it is to find an actual good engineer. There's a very clear gap in what people are looking for. And that brings me to what I think are the majority of the open roles right now that are struggling to find engineers, which is open roles from non-enterprise level companies. So this includes startups and mid-sized companies. And I think from what I'm going to explain to you guys about these roles, a lot of you guys are going to get kind of pissed off, and I'm just relaying what I've been told. I cannot shape what they are looking for, and the market is the market. I've seen some very clear patterns from recruiters and specifically founders at startups, what they are looking for in a software engineer. A lot of it gets summed into what people are calling nowadays cracked devs. A cracked dev, from what I understand, is an engineer that knows what they are doing while also being able to make use of AI to the most effective degree possible. And also, of course, takes a high degree of ownership and is not afraid to work more than 40 hours a week. There, that's like the TLDR of what a lot of these smaller companies are looking for. And don't get me wrong, the only thing that's new about this is the AI part, but startups always wanted engineers that were willing to sit there and grind for more than 60 hours a week, because the sad truth of the market is if you hire people that aren't willing to work more than 40 hours a week, your startup is probably going to fail. Like, look at all the successful startups in history. The founders were working over 100 hours a week, and the early employees were doing something similar. And I think if you asked a lot of the early employees at successful startups whether they regret doing it, I think the answer would be no, because at that stage, you get enough equity in the company that, yeah, you don't have as much say as the founders do, but if you work really hard and make the company successful, you still have a really big payout at the end of the day. And again, I'm not saying I necessarily agree with it or I think that's the way things should be, but that's the way things are. And when I had my startup in the past, and when I scale this startup in the future, I'm probably going to favor engineers that are willing to work more than 40 hours a week than those who aren't. And it's not just because it's some standard I'm setting, but the other issue is there are engineers that are willing to do that. And while they are the minority, they stand out a lot more than the other engineers in the candidate pool. Let's take Soham, for example, the dude that was working like 5 jobs at a time. Here's what he put at the top of his cold email to YC startup founders that got him so many interviews that later got him hired. Now just listen to this and tell me if you were a startup founder, you wouldn't prefer someone like this over someone that didn't really care about your business, and just needed a job. He starts his email with the TLDR, I love everything about what Happenstance is doing. I don't have many hobbies outside coding. I'm not athletic, bad at singing, don't drink, can't dance. Building is the only thing I'm good at this point. I just want to be a part of taking something from 0 to 1 or 1 to 100. I just want to be heads down chasing that goal. That sums up what a lot of these startup founders and mid-level companies are looking for in an engineer. Do I think that if we could somehow control on a societal level that this should not be a thing? Yes. But on the other hand, the reality is that you have engineers, not like Soham, that are willing to actually join one company and give everything for it because that's what they care about in life, and they don't want to start something themselves, but they want to be a part of something bigger. The fact that there are engineers like that is what makes the market the way it is today. Because if you have a company that has a couple of those engineers versus the engineers you would find in enterprise, you're probably going to be far more successful than the other companies. And that is just the truth of the matter. Do with it what you will. If you want to get hired in enterprise, I'd recommend getting really good at interviewing, and I'm not going to recommend cheating, but it seems like that's something people have to do nowadays to be on equal playing fields with the other engineers that are applying. Or if you want to work at a startup and have that chance of getting your 1 to 2% equity as a founding engineer and having a huge exit in 3 to 4 years, this is the type of person you have to be. And I think because of how engineering as a whole got marketed like 10 years ago as this career where you didn't have to actually care about what you were doing, you could get a cushy job at some Google level company and have great work-life balance, it incentivized all the wrong people to move into the industry, which I think played a big part of where we are today. There's no shortage of companies that take advantage of candidates, but by the same token, there's definitely no shortage of candidates who aren't good at what they do, don't actually care about what they do, and almost feel entitled to a 6-figure salary because they got a degree. I think both those types of companies and those types of candidates really ruined it for the rest of us who actually are passionate about programming and went into it because we were interested in it. And now the job prospects are really sketchy because you have people in the industry that are just trying to take advantage of the other side. Another really surprising thing I've heard from a lot of the startups I'm working with is that they do not want an engineer that has worked at an enterprise company. Like, a real red flag they have given me to flag in our systems is if you are an engineer that has worked 2 years at like Google or something, they do not want you at their startup. And the reason for that is, like I said, the type of engineer that goes and gets a corporate job versus the type of engineer that works as a startup, at this point might as well be 2 separate job roles. And if you don't understand the divide on these 2 separate job roles, it's going to be very hard for you to get a job. Well, that and the fact that a lot of people have really terrible resumes. Like, I've gone over 1,000 resumes in the last 2 weeks, and it really blows my mind how bad a lot of the resumes are. I made a whole 20-minute video going over what the exact resume should look like. You can find it on my YouTube. I'll link it below. Again, these are just the things I have noticed as somebody who's working with both sides. I get hundreds of engineers asking me for advice on a weekly basis, and I'm currently trying to fill almost 10 roles for software engineering companies, and I've basically taken up a job as a recruiter. And having done that puts me in a really weird situation where I see a lot of the bad things that candidates are doing and a lot of the unreal expectations that companies have for candidates nowadays. So yeah, that's just what I've observed. Take it with a grain of salt. Maybe I'll make another report back maybe in a month from now when I've talked to more companies. But hopefully this helped. And if you want to discuss this more, I have a Discord community. Make sure you hit that subscribe button for more tips on how to land a job. I'll see you guys in the next video.